everybody. It's Hamtopia and Bevy here. Sunday the 19th. Carrying on with The Reaper and the Scribe by John Paul Bernett, chapter 29. Thank you for listening today, if you're here. As the 21st century became a teenager, Alice Winters Chambers moved away from her father's office and moved to a building that dealt solely with helping unemployed and homeless people. Now that the program of building hostels had come to a very successful conclusion, Alice was the owner of 100 purpose-built sanctuaries to give underprivileged people a helping hand in life. The transport side of her business had grown at an unbelievable pace, as an injection of several billion pounds sterling from a trust fund set up by one of her ancestors in Victorian times, which had been reinvested over and over again, had matured, much to everyone's surprise, so that she could concentrate on helping young people and the vulnerable in a society that she and other wealthy people were so comfortable in. She had placed Laura Dinsdale in control of the logistics side of the business, with full agreement from her father. Laura was happy and soon to be married to her loving fiancé. Her kids now had a proper father figure, and their future looked rosy. Not too long after she had moved back into the full-time haulage work, she realized she missed the freedom of her old office and longed to be doing the job that she came back to do. However, she took pride in a job well done. Laura and Jamie were planning their upcoming wedding and had found a new marital home just outside of Leeds. Up until that point, Jamie had never been fully ready to commit. His mind could not stay in the here and now. He was always contemplating the future or living in the past. Something had always stopped him from tying the knot with Laura. However, whatever that something was had made Jamie believe that now was the time, and a date was set. The wedding would be on the 11th of May, 2014. Jamie and Laura planned for a long and happy future. But the fact was that the future would be long, but very different to the one they were planning for. Alice's new office building was not part of a spectacular skyscraper. Indeed, it didn't even have separate offices. She had the middle floor of a quite low-key building, and the whole floor was open plan. There was a reception desk by the elevator with a young man in attendance. The room was filled with 50 desks, each with the telephone and computer. Everyone that worked on that floor had been recruited from one of Alice's hostels. Sitting at desk number 35 was a woman who was dressed very plainly and looked like a visit to the hairdresser's was well overdue. She was on the phone, finding a place for the night for a young woman who had been thrown out of her house because her parents had found out she was pregnant. The young man from reception walked over to her desk. Placing a hand over the receiver, she asked the receptionist what was wrong. "There is a Mr. Paladin downstairs. He says he has an appointment with you, Alice." "People don't need an appointment to see me," said Alice Winters Chambers. "Nevertheless, he says he and his companion have one." "In that case, bring him to me when he arrives," said Alice, smiling. Alice returned to her phone call, totally oblivious to the fact that everything she had been through since her switch in time had led her to that pivotal point in her life, and to meet the stranger who was entering the elevator downstairs. Back in Victorian England, the train from London pulled into the railway station at Leeds. Amongst the throngs of people spilling out onto the platform, two brothers walked triumphantly towards the building at the end. Alicia Winters had heard the London train arrive and had come out to meet her two brothers. There was a pensive moment when James and Alicia met, but it was broken by Alicia putting out her arms towards her youngest brother. The two embraced, and in that wonderful moment, all that had passed between them melted away. Alicia stood in the middle of her two brothers, pinned her hat into her hair, and linked both their arms. "We are going for afternoon tea to celebrate James coming back into the fold. Everything will be as it was, James. Everything will be well again," said Alicia. "There is much to discuss, Alice," said John. "Not until after tea. After tea, we should all go back to your house, John, and formulate a plan," said Alice. "That sounds good to me. What do you think, James?" "Sounds good to me, too." Tea was a grand affair, with sandwiches and cakes of every description. There was cultivated conversation that had nothing to do with work, James's time in London, or the future. Just three siblings enjoying each other's company. After tea, as planned, the three siblings strolled to John's townhouse, and after a beverage, they settled down to make the transition for James that much easier. Monday arrived, and James was back at work, living his life again. It didn't take him long to get into the swing of his new position. The company had grown greatly since he'd last worked for them, and now he was a full partner. He threw himself into the work. As the years passed, to him, the 5 years seemed to go slowly. It was a worthwhile time for James, as there was so much to learn. John had run that department like a well-oiled machine. Movement of goods was always constant, and the workforce respected John. John, however, had deteriorated. The final year that he was alive was hard for him and his siblings, who had to watch the deterioration of their much-loved brother. The year was 1891, and probably best known as the year that Arthur Conan Doyle's detective, Sherlock Holmes, appeared in the Strand magazine for the first time. But the Winters family cared not about a fictitious detective wearing a deerstalker hat and smoking a pipe, for that was the year that Alice, James, and Frederick said goodbye forever to their brother and uncle. During what had been one of the worst winters known, their brother John's fight had run its course, and the illness that had plagued him for the previous 8 years finally took his life. John's funeral should have been stately. He was responsible for so many things, none of which history recorded. His devotion to his sister gave her the strength to do what she had to do. His guidance to his younger brother James and his beloved nephew Frederick would prove invaluable during the years to come. So much was owed to this man by future generations that he would never meet, but oblivious would they be to his existence. The funeral procession following the coffin was Alice, James, and Frederick, followed by John's entire workforce, all of whom wanted to pay their last respects and were willing to lose a day's pay to do so. Of course, Alice made sure that their wages were paid in full. John was lowered into the grave in the family plot, joining his father and mother, who were at rest in the grounds of Leeds Parish Church. Alicia, James, and Frederick each threw a handful of soil onto their loved one and then left the sad grave. The following day at work, James officially took over for his deceased brother John without pomp or ceremony, because unofficially he had been doing the job for the past year. Alice came over to the dispatch building and to her brother James's office. She had come to talk to him about the actual office. She wondered if he would like to change anything, as the office was now his and not his brother's. The discussion was short, as James wanted no changes whatsoever. In a way, keeping the office as it was made it feel as if John was still around. Alice was thankful for that decision, and she bent down and kissed her brother's head. The decade of the 1890s saw Frederick really come into his own. His financial department ran effortlessly, and with the passing of his uncle, his mother was now forced to think about her own mortality. In a decade that saw the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies being formed, this society that knew nothing of the strides Alicia Winters had made. Also, Guglielmo Marconi was awarded a patent for radio communication, thus beginning the wireless age, and Frederick flourished. A year after John's passing, Frederick fell in love with a beautiful girl who he first met when she came looking for a job as an office girl. The two seemed to hit it off instantly. Her name was Glenda Arkwright. She stood a mere 5 feet in height and was of slight build, with a very sunny disposition. She had very long hair, but it was always tied up. One of the main things Frederick liked about her was that she reminded him of his mother. She wasn't demure or happy to take a back seat. She was fully committed to the fact that women were as good as men and deserved the same privileges. Whilst the vast majority of men at the time would have run away from someone like this, to Frederick, that outlook was one of her strongest points. If feminism had been around in that time, Frederick would have been one. Alicia adored Glenda, and it didn't take long for her to rise through the ranks at Alicia's company. Glenda's outlook was exactly what Alicia had taught all the girls that worked for her. Alicia was kept up to date with the suffragette movement through Glenda, and anonymously through Glenda funded that great cause. Time waits for no one, and soon it was another new year, heralding 1895, and the last joyous year for the Winters family. At the start of the year in January, Frederick and Glenda were married. The ceremony was held in a small church just behind the old Tudor building in the center of town. Afterwards, at the White Locks Public House, formerly the Turk's Head, for a wonderful lunch for the family and all the workers. As summer came, August 1st, to be exact, Alicia Winters formally retired. She was handing over the helm to her son, Frederick. Alicia stepped down from a business that she had taken from a one-horse-drawn canal boat moving coal from Thwaitgate and South Leeds on the Ayr and Calder Canal to Kirkstall and West Leeds on the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, to a business that moved every kind of commodity throughout the mainland British Isles by rail. She had 32 steam locomotives that were constantly running and a goods yard full of rolling stock. If history had been allowed to record Alicia's business prowess, she would have been up there with the Great Britons of industry. Alicia's business, however, was not about such petty things. The whole world's future depended upon the actions of first Alice Whatson, and then her alter ego, Alicia Winters. The one and the same girl and woman had done everything asked of her, and delivered her father, Albert Whatson, who changed his name to Albert Winters, small business into the mega business it had become, just as she promised him she would. Retirement was well earned as a gray-haired, elderly lady stepped down from the helm. The year was completed in a joyous way, as in the early morning, on the 16th of December, 1895, Frederick and Glinda's son, Jacob Albert Winters, was born. The following year, Alicia's happiness doubled, as Alice Samantha Winters weighed in at 6 pounds 4 ounces on December the 12th. As Frederick and Glinda's family grew, so too did the business. Alicia's demanding work was carried on by Frederick. Glinda was a fantastic mother, but not too long after little Alice was born, she was back at work at her husband's side, and a nanny now had rooms within their house to look after the 2 children. The rest of the century passed quickly for Alicia, as much time was spent in the company of her 2 grandchildren. Many afternoons were enjoyed helping the children's nanny. Alicia had changed from the hard-nosed businesswoman into an adorable granny. As Frederick and Glinda were successfully making strides forward with her business, she had no more use for the hard-nosed look on life. 4 years passed in the blink of an eye, and the date was now the 12th of December, 1899, and a very special granddaughter was about to get 2 very extraordinary gifts from her granny for her birthday. The first gift, which sent little Alice into fits of excitement and giggles, was a rocking horse, a beautifully hand-carved wooden rocking horse with a real hare mane and tail and leather saddle. Frederick lifted Alice up and placed her in the saddle. As soon as her little bottom touched that saddle and she took hold of the reins, she rocked that horse with all her might and announced the horse's name to be Toby. Alicia's mind slipped back as Toby came galloping back into her thoughts. She smiled at her granddaughter and said, "That's a lovely name." After a short while, Alicia called her granddaughter to her knee. The frail, silver-haired lady lifted her granddaughter up and nestled the tiny girl in her lap. With teary eyes, she kissed her granddaughter's forehead and said, "I have another present for you now, little one. I have no more use for it, and it must be passed down through all the female members of this family." Although she was talking to little Alice, she was looking directly at Alice's mother, Glinda. Alicia slipped the ring from her finger and motioned Glinda to come towards her, saying, "This ring is for Alice Samantha. As soon as it fits her little finger, it is the most precious possession I own. I want you to wear it, Glinda, until Alice is ready. I don't even remember how I first came to own the ring, but I once gave it to a destitute woman. Not long after giving her the ring, she came back to see me and tell me that the ring had brought her tremendous luck, and that luck had turned her life around. She then gave the ring back to me and encouraged me to pass it down the line of female family members. I have kept this ring all my life. There is something special about it. It is not a particularly precious ring made from expensive stones or gold, but to me it's priceless. And now I place it in your care." "Why have you decided to do this now, Mother?" asked Frederick. "I have lived a long and fruitful life, but that life is almost at an end. Passing that ring down the line and telling that story is so important. Please make sure whoever gets this ring throughout future events knows how they came to own it, and the story of the little old lady on the canal bank." "This is a joyful day, Mother. Please don't think of such things. The thought of you not being around is too depressing to even consider," said Glinda. "Give me your word, Glinda, and we shall talk of it no more." "Of course you have my word. You know you can trust me," assured Glinda. "In that case, it's back to the horse for you, young lady," said Granny with a smile. A very giddy Alice Samantha ran to her new pony, and her groomsman helped her into the saddle. The end of the month came, and with it a new millennium, the beginning of which was bad for both Great Britain and most of the world, and for the Winters family. On 22nd of January, 1901, Great Britain's longest reigning monarch, Queen Victoria, died and brought an end to the Victorian Age, a time that had seen so much development in engineering. The entire country mourned her passing, and only 5 short weeks later, Alicia Winters lay in her bed, her family all around her. Her work for the powers that be was at an end, and as she looked at her gathered family through dimming eyes, thoughts of the past came back to her. She could hear muffled laughter as she jumped off the boat in that new pinafore that her mother had made for her birthday, her brother John chasing her with dirty hands. Next came a whirlwind, and meeting a tall gentleman. He was broad and handsome, and his name was Freddie. Strange horseless carriages, bright lights, happy sensual moments flashed by. Another whirlwind, and her dad with open arms, smiling. She saw her mother, and she explained that her tummy felt strange. The joyful day Frederick was born. Long, happy summer days. John, I have bought my office building. James driving the steam engines. The thoughts were beginning to come so fast that they were all merging into one mumbled thought. The low crying sound from the room grew fainter. Then suddenly, everything seemed quiet. Stood by her bed was a tall man she remembered. He took her hand and said, "Alice, it is time to meet me again." "Mr. Atkinson? Is it time already? My name is Alicia." "My records only show the name at birth, Alice. Now, come to me." Alice sat upright, drew back the bedclothes, and stood up. She was no longer old. She was young Alice again. She felt as light as a feather as she took Atkinson's hand and walked out of the room, never looking back. Alicia took her last breath. Then the doctor covered her head with the sheet. The family comforted each other, as they knew someone of great stature had just died. The solemn day of Alicia's funeral arrived. It certainly wasn't the magnificent start to the millennium that the family was looking towards. The grandchildren were inconsolable, and although Frederick had run his mother's business since her retirement, the world now seemed a scary place without her counsel. The weight of the world now fell on the shoulders of Frederick and Glinda. The horse-drawn hearse bearing Alicia's coffin set off from Frederick's house. It was followed by James, Frederick, Glinda holding the hands of their two children, and once again the entire workforce, which now made for quite a procession. There were so many following the coffin that people began to stand on the sidewalks, wondering who it was that was passing by. By the time the procession turned onto the roadway towards the parish church, the streets were lined with people, wondering who was inside the casket, none of them knowing the greatness of the woman within. Inside the church, the vicar who conducted the service spoke about Alicia's many virtues, including her kindness to others, but most of all, celebrating her life as a true person driven by family and the love of others. The pallbearers then took Alicia on her final journey to join her mother, father, and younger brother John in the family plot. As James looked on at his sister being lowered into the hole, he knew there was only one space left in that plot, and it was for him. Within 2 years, and the new century only being 4 years old, James indeed did join the rest of his family. Every last one of the original Whatson family were again lying in the same place, just as they did when nighttime fell in their canal boat lightning. Although the 20th century had not started well for what was left of the Winters family, the two deaths were not unexpected, and it didn't take too long for Frederick and Glinda to be back full steam ahead. Glinda was every bit the strong woman that Alicia had taught her to become. She fully supported Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughters Christabel and Sylvia when they founded the Women's Social and Political Union in 1903. She knew she was living in a turbulent time during this early part of the century, when more radical stands were being made by women, desperately trying to gain the vote for their sisters. Many were the times she returned home from a rally with cuts about her person and her dress covered in blood, courtesy of the police. Frederick was happy to continue the work that his mother had begun. Often he was running the company on his own, as his wife Glinda was on one of her suffragette campaigns. Frederick was quite happy with this, as he liked to be kept busy, and he fully supported his wife's beliefs that women should be allowed to vote, just like their male counterparts. The once small company, started by his mother, was now a huge concern, with a workforce of over 600 people in depots not just in Leeds, but all over England. Frederick was happy that his son and daughter would be joining the workforce soon and working their way up the ladder to join his wife and himself in the head office. Looking further into the future, the thing that his mother had always told him to do, he saw his children running the company and taking it to even greater heights, a part of the future that Frederick wasn't aware of, though, were the war clouds forming over Europe, and how a part of future history that would happen 2 years before that war would start would decimate his blissful family life. Time and tide wait for no one. You cannot change your past, and only 2 people have ever been able to alter their future, and that was only because Mother Nature decreed it so. What awaits Frederick in the not-too-distant future would test anyone. For whom does the bell toll? Who indeed has a date with the Reaper?